Hi, I'm Sharon Landon, and welcome to my podcast, Old Asian Lady. Today, my guest is Heather Lowder Martin.
Yes.
And thank you,
Of course.
Heather, for coming. I know
Thanks
that
for having me.
Yeah, well, I know. I'm especially grateful because I know that you had a flight back from the U.S. just a couple of days ago, and
Yeah, it was a rough one for sure. I mean, the flight alone, was almost 30 hours of flying from Florida to Houston, Houston to San Francisco to Taipei. But then you add that each flight was late, delayed, and the final flight was turbulence. The entire flight. Like, I pretty much thought this was the end.
oh my God.
It was really bad. So I didn't sleep at all. But I've had a couple of good night's sleep, so you'll get me at about 80%.
Okay, I'll take it. But Heather is from the U.S. and you're actually here in Taiwan again on the second stint.
Yes.
With your husband Tim, who's teaching at the Taipei American School.
Yep, exactly.
Right. Okay. And today we're going to be talking, sharing stories about our adoption experiences.
Right.
I mean, Heather adopted a little girl, and I was adopted as a little girl. So it'll be interesting to be able to share stories and compare, even though you adopted and I was the adoptee.
Right,
but,
right. It's a nice perspective to have from the other side, I think.
Yeah.
To see how it felt.
So how old was your daughter? Can you tell me about what led to her adoption?
Yeah, so I'll tell you the story. I'll tell kind of the short version, I guess. My mother was pretty sick. My mother was diagnosed with breast cancer. And at the time, my sister was living with her newborn. She had a newborn baby. And as my mother's illness got quite worse and she was deteriorating, there was no way for my mother to have that extra people in her house. She was, fighting with aggressive chemo and radiation. So my sister had to find another place to live. But my sister she struggles with addiction issues. And what ended up being different places was she was couch surfing, that theme of like just from couch to couch.
Right.
And I was quite worried about my niece at the time. And I'm taking care of my mom full time. So I offered one weekend, I said, why don't you let me have the baby for a weekend and really spend these 2 days trying to find an actual place to live. And I worked full time, so I took my niece for the weekend. Well, Sunday night, she never showed up to pick her up. And so I was scrambling to try to get a hold of her, get a hold of the father, which we knew who the father was. My sister and this man were married, but they were in the middle of a divorce. And I couldn't get him on the phone, so I just ended up finding some temporary daycare for her, thinking I'll track my sister down in a few days and we'll figure this out. And the long and the short of it is she's mine now. So my sister and I did connect at one point, and she was quite worried that the places she was living were not fit for the baby. Who was 2 at the time now. So my daughter was 2 at this time. Right. She had just turned 2. And I said, okay, well, why don't you take a solid month and I'll figure this out for a month, but use that month wisely, like really buckle down, figure things out. And my mom subsequently passed during that time. And my mom passing was pretty devastating, obviously. Losing a parent is never fun. But for my sister, it was absolutely soul crushing, because my mom and my sister were quite close. My sister's the youngest. And my sister, who already had addiction problems, really spun, just completely out of control. So then my mom passed away in September. She passed away in September. And my sister said, I'll get my life together by Christmas. Just keep her till Christmas. So I put a temporary life together, I didn't buy all the baby things or the kid things. I just bought the bare necessities because I didn't think I'd have her for very long. So I had her until December, and Christmas came and went, and she wasn't ready. Oh, I'll have her by her birthday, which was in April. And then April came and went, and she didn't have everything figured out. So the long and the short of it, obviously there's, more to the story I could share if you want, but she became mine. So I've had her since she was 2. And she is 26 now. So,
Wow.
so I've had her for
24 years
yeah,
already.
as a single mom for the biggest portion of that.
Right.
Yeah, not really being amply prepared. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't like I was waiting to adopt a child and couldn't wait to be a mom. None of those things were right. I wasn't one of those people waiting for, to be picked as somebody to adopt a child. So I was pretty ill prepared for it. I remember trying to pick a daycare and not having the slightest idea, what's a good daycare? I remember thinking, I have no idea. I'm just dropping my kid off, and I mean, at the time, my niece, I don't know. Please don't hurt her. I'll be back at the end of the day. You know what I mean? I was just not as equipped, I think, for it initially. But, I loved her. And I think, that's the basis of all family is love. So that love was there. So as long as that love was there, the rest of it I could kind of figure out.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's interesting because it's not a standard adoption story, I would have to say. And you had this just placed on your lap. So what can you do? I mean, yeah, you had a month or 2 months, but then it's still, when it really actually happened, it was kind of I don't know if it would be a shock or anything. It was just a big thing to have to deal with.
Yeah, I think, for me, I think it might have actually been better that it was slow. Because if my sister just said, here you go, I might have searched out alternatives. I might have felt ill prepared, but because I kept thinking it was temporary, then okay, I could do this for a couple of months, right? And I'd figure it out. And then I could do it, I can do it for a couple more months. But I think if she initially just said, here's a kid, good luck, I don't know. I've never really thought about it, but I might have raised my hand and said, let's look at foster care or something.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Because I took it on thinking it was temporary, and that made it okay at first.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I can do it for a little while. So I think ultimately it all happened the way it was supposed to happen. So it never felt like this huge jolt, here's this kid you got to figure, a little bit. I had to figure things out kind of initially, but it always felt like it's temporary. I can do anything for a little while. Had I known at the beginning that it was going to be a lifetime adventure, I don't know, I would have signed up. I would have felt not because I didn't love her, because I did, but I might have thought I wasn't good enough. You know what I mean? I was single. I wasn't in any way, I wasn't looking to create a family. I wasn't there. So I might have thought I wasn't good enough, but I definitely thought I was temporary enough. You know what I mean? Initially.
Yeah. It's I'll take care of them, and then they go home with you. It's just like nowadays when my friends have kids or something like that. And it's great to go to the house, but take care of them for a little while. But at the end of the day, they're not staying with me.
Right. That level of responsibility seemed very temporary, and I could do it very temporarily. But ultimately, I'm glad it happened the way it happened, but it did have a huge impact on my life. What I thought was temporary turned into permanent, which changed the absolute complete direction of my life, for sure.
Yeah. For me, I was adopted when I was 5, 6 years old, and I was lucky enough that my brother was adopted with me so that I had, companionship. But, I never really ever talk to my mom or dad about this period of time in my life before or right after I was adopted. And because we were doing the show, I had called her up and I said, Mom, I'm doing this podcast, about adoption, and I just have some questions to ask you. And she's 80 something now. So her memory is still pretty good, but of course, obviously she couldn't remember a lot, but she told me a lot of things that I didn't know about. And the thing is that I didn't remember a lot of things during that period of time because we were adopted from Taiwan, and because my dad, American dad, he was in the Navy. He was based in Okinawa at the time. And I just found out that they actually went to great lengths to adopt me and my brother anyway, it was an interesting story.
Right?
But yeah, how did your friends or your mom pass away? But did your friends give you comments or give you advice or talk about this situation that's happening?
So I got her when I was 30. So luckily I had a little life experience under my belt. I wasn't like 22 and like, looking to go to the clubs every night or whatever. So I had a little life experience under my belt. And most of my friends were very similar in age. Some of them had children. So they were really willing to like help.
Oh,
you know what I mean? Like offered to babysit for me, offered, in fact, my first nanny was actually a friend of mine, now sister-in-law. She married my brother. So my first nanny was like actually family. So I had a lot of people who were really super supportive. And I had a roommate at the time, and the roommate was super supportive, and they bonded really quickly as well. This roommate really wanted children and wasn't able to have children, so they bonded pretty quickly. As friends or whatever. I remember my daughter used to call her Taco Dana. I don't know why. We never.
Must ate tacos every
Taco
time she
Dana.
enters her
Well,
house.
she was Hispanic and she didn't make a lot of Mexican food, so maybe I never really thought about that. It was Taco Dana. So I think everyone was really super supportive. I think that what happened as it got more permanent. Then people they didn't stop being supportive. Everyone was always super supportive. But once it was kind of like more official, then it was like, oh, you don't need our help as much anymore.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I remember there's a few times where I'm like, later on in the situation, I'm like, I'm alone in this. Like I'm alone doing this, right? And people's lives were going on. I have no ill will towards anyone. You know what I mean? But it was like all that initial help and support and boosting up and like, we're going to do this together, slowly felt into, yeah, it's kind of on you. And I remember feeling pretty isolated for a while, you know what I mean? And feeling like I got to do this on my own, and I was a single mom. Like I said, I was a working mom. So I was, she'd go to school, then she'd have after school care, and then she'd have a nanny that was meet at the house until I got home. And then I'd come home and then I was a mom, you know what I mean? Where before I would come home and just sit on the couch and just veg out. Now I had mom stuff to do. So there were some times, and I would imagine your mother would say the same thing. I know that this is a true fact because I actually ended up going to a counselor to talk about it a little bit. There was a bit of resentment in the fact that, what did I do? Why did I do this? Like, why? Not because my child's not amazing and wonderful and didn't enrich my life, but it changed so many things for me.
Yeah, I can
that there were times where I'm like, I don't know that I signed up for the right category for me. So especially in those early teenage years when kids are starting to find their own voice, they don't want to listen to mommy anymore, and I'm thinking, like, can I do this? Can I do this? So, but everyone was always very supportive. So, but at some point it was my responsibility and it did fall solely on me.
Yeah, it's interesting when you're talking about you thinking about, oh, why me, this responsibility? Because in my conversation with my mom the other day, I kind of felt a little bit like she had that just for a period of time, because my thing was that when my mom and dad were based in Taiwan, my mother was working for them as a nanny, housekeeper, took care of their babies. They had 2 boys, and they had actually moved to, and this I just found out, that they had actually already moved from Taiwan to Okinawa at the time. My dad, like I said, he was in the Navy, and there was some kind of crisis going on called the, I don't know, some kind of political thing going on with the U.S. in that area. And so it was really a difficult time. But the lady that my mom was working with at the time had contacted my parents and said, oh, my mom had passed away. And because the Landons knew my family, my mom really well, and we had met them as kids, they were really concerned because they knew our family's financial situation. I mean, our family had 8 kids. I mean, back then when Chinese families have a lot of kids as just a natural thing. And so my dad, who was fluent in Mandarin, my American dad, he came back and all the processes went through about them trying to adopt us. And it took a while. But my mom was telling me the other day, she was saying, oh, you know, she's sorry if she probably was a little bit harder on us at times, because it's not that it was only my dad that made the decision, but to have 2 additional kids, plus they had two babies of their own at the time, I think it was pretty hard on my mom as well. And I told her, well, I really don't remember her ever being hard on us. You know, there's certain memories that I have and certain things that I remember, but I never remembered that. So,
well, it's interesting you say that because during the time that things started to get a little rough with my daughter, and I started just going to see a counselor because I was really concerned that the feelings that I was having about my daughter and this resentments and the frustrations were because I adopted her, and I wanted to find a way to get over that. And I remember my therapist telling me 2 really specific things, which is kind of to what you're talking about. One, she goes, I therapy all kinds of people. She goes, every parent has a resentment, whether they give birth or not. They just do. Kids are hard. They are. So she goes, the fact that you even care enough to have a resentment means you love your child. So don't worry that you don't love her. But the other thing she also said is, because I worried that my daughter would feel it. Do you know what I mean? She would feel my resentment, or she would feel my aggravation, or I'd be frustrated because I could sometimes be short, you know what I mean? Like short fuse, and because I was tired and I was frustrated, you know? And I remember my therapist saying, you're the only love she knows. So she doesn't have anything to compare it to. So what you think might be something you did that you could have done better or you should have done differently, she has no comparison. To her, everything you're doing, as long as it's based in love, is fine. And I remember thinking, what a relief, right? Like, I'm comparing myself to my mom, and I'm comparing myself to my friend's mom, and I'm doing all of these comparisons thinking I'm not good enough. She doesn't have that comparison. So I'm sure your mom felt the same way. Like, I have another really good friend who adopted a child and had a natural born child. And she said that she treated her adopted child slightly different, and she didn't know why. But she said that her adopted child said he never saw it. To him, it was non-existent. Right? So I think that we are our own worst enemy as a parent who adopts. We question every decision we make. So I'm sure that conversation with your mom was more of her insecurities and things she knew she could have done better. But as children, you're resilient to those kinds of things, right? Like, to you, you're like, you just love me. You took care of me. You took me in. You know, that's not to say you didn't have 1 or 2 spats with your mother. I'm sure you did. All moms and daughters do.
I remember when we got older, there was more spats. But, you know, at the time when we were adopted, or around that period of time, I don't remember anything, you know, difficult or stuff like that. But for your daughter, she was you adopted her at 2. And at what point did you just mentioning how she not acted up, but doing things what kids do and challenge their parents and things like that. Did she start doing that at an early age, or it was up to her teenage years, or?
You know, so, I mean, obviously the teenage years were the worst, based on just teenage years are terrible, right? But my daughter definitely has some diagnosed problems. Having not been held as a child, she has abandonment issues. She has detachment disorder. So even when I got her at 2, some of her behaviors were difficult to deal with because she didn't want to be like, when she was in trouble, it was timeout. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted timeout. And so I would put her in a room and she'd have panic attacks about being alone in a room. And I just thought she was being a terrible two, right? It's like, just, you're fine. Just, sit in your room for 10 minutes and learn your lesson. But she'd sob uncontrollably. And so after working with a therapist and realizing that she had abandonment issues and she felt like at any time I would leave her and leave her alone, I had to adjust things. So it was like, okay, so now timeout was crisscross applesauce in the living room, looking away from me, but I was at least in the room with her, right? So she would just sit, facing the wall,
right,
not alone in her room. So she's, and she has, so she has other types of issues like that. She is a people pleaser, again, because she's, I think, afraid of being abandoned. So there were a lot of times, especially, early adolescence where it was difficult for her to find her voice. So because she wanted so desperately to just do what she thought I needed her to do. And she's a completely different child than me. Like, we couldn't be more polar opposites. Like, she's super artsy and creative. I mean, I have a little bit of that, but I'm pretty structured, and she's more, she would draw on her hands all day. I'm like, stop drawing on your hands. You look like you have tattoos at 6. Stop it. But
Did she draw on the walls and stuff like that?
And it would drive me bananas, you know? And so we had to learn each other's path, right? I had to learn where she needed to be to have a voice. I remember her therapist once telling me the same thing. She had had a fight at school with some kids, and I told her, just go tomorrow and make friends with someone new. Just make a new friend, you'll be fine. And her therapist had to call me and she can't make friends like you. She's so much more introverted. That is not even an option for her to just go and make a new friend. And she wants to please you, so she'll tell you she'll do this. Now she doesn't have a friend and she's let you down. So you're adding more pressure to your child, And so there was a lot of struggles. I could have had the same natural born child. So I'm not saying those struggles happened because she was adopted.
Right.
But we ended up just being very polar opposites in the way we handle life and stresses. So there was a lot of there's a lot of learning for me, and I used to tell her, I still tell her, we talk about it all the time. I said, I made none of the mistakes my mother made. I made all new ones. You know what I mean? I did my best to not make the mistakes that I knew hurt me as a child.
Yeah.
But in not doing those, I made a slew of other mistakes. So, I did the best I could. And she's at 26, she's pretty appreciative now. Took a while to get there.
Yeah, I think this is the thing. We do the best that we can at the time, but we also tend to still beat ourselves up a bit. When you're talking about your daughter having abandonment issues, she was abandoned by her mom, your sister, but how it affects her, I feel like it's kind of more of a subconscious level, because I know as an adult, even though I don't remember any things that were really bad about my time of being adopted, my mom told me that I was quite stoic. I didn't, cry. I was kind of pretty shy during that time, and I never had any tantrums. I never got upset or stuff like that. And she said that could be just because you're Chinese. And in my mind, I'm thinking it probably was something that my father or my family, my real family, had told me that, maybe, you're going to the United States, you're going to America to have a good opportunity. Don't make us lose face. I don't know what it is.
Right.
But I think I must have held it in. But as I got older, when you're talking about those type of feelings, because, you get into exploring different modalities about healing or understanding yourself and based on your past and stuff. And, it came out that at one time, not a therapist, but an energy type of healer type of person had mentioned to me that, I probably had some abandonment issues way down deep in my psyche, even
Right.
though on the surface I wasn't really conscious about it. So because it's in the self-conscious, it kind of sometimes affects your self-identity, the identity issue or your self-worth and things like that. And I thought that was pretty interesting because I did explore that, and
Right.
hopefully we released a lot of those issues from back then. Like I said, I really honestly didn't remember having anything.
Yeah, the body and the mind, especially the mind of a child, has, I believe, like a very strong survival technique, right? And whatever they need to tuck away that's painful, you just tuck away. But as a grown up, wanting to have a healthy, mature relationship with yourself, sometimes you got to peel back that onion and kind of dig out some of that stuff. I mean, I have, we talked on a previous session, about some of my childhood trauma. It leaves scars, you know what I mean? And as an adult, I think it's important for you to want to identify why, you know what I mean? Maybe you get triggered easily over something and that stems back from being abandoned. You feel scared, you have fears. So I think it's healthy that you're exploring that, from an energy standpoint, therapeutic standpoint. We can all stand, to address the building blocks that make us, right? And make sure that they're all aligned the way they should be aligned so that we have the best base possible. So good for you to do that.
Yeah, like that's another topic to be discussed.
Our deep-suited therapy and we're going to need a couple more hours for that.
Really, right? So for your daughter then, did she just live with you actually you adopted her. At what point did you decide that it was necessary to adopt her compared to just, it's just taking care of your sister's daughter forever type of thing?
Well, it started out with needing to, so she needed health care, right? And in America, you can't just add somebody to your health care because you want to, right? They need to be family of some sort. And so when I went to my employer, they said, well, you need to get something in writing, And so I initially went to an attorney. And this is after having her for probably about a year. And the attorney said, don't start a fight, you won't win. And my sister was still of the mindset that she was going to get her life together and get her back.
How many years was this after?
Probably about a year after.
Okay.
So he said, don't start a fight, you can't win. He goes, if you go for full adoption, she'll fight you and you'll lose because the court system is keep families together, especially in California. He goes, so let's approach it kind of quietly. Let's just do a legal guardianship, and you can approach it with your sister that, hey, look, I'm just doing this so I can put her on insurance. I need her covered for insurance. I'm not trying to take over here. Because my sister was still very volatile, she'd show up out of nowhere and be upset that, I want to know, what daycare is she at? I need to, she's just very volatile.
Yeah.
Right? She still felt like she wanted to be involved in the situation, even though she was not involved in the situation, right?
Right.
So she hadn't relented and given up. She hadn't given in completely. So we did legal guardianship. And so I had to get that signed off on pretty much everybody, mom, dad, and grandparents, because grandparents have rights. So I got that all signed off, and then I had her for a legal guardianship for years. And legal guardian is the same as adoption. There's just really no difference.
Okay.
And so I did that for probably 7-8 years. And then I went to, this is probably not something that I've actually ever shared with you, but so then I went back to the attorney to do the adoption. And he said to me, he goes, I'll take your money. It's $10,000. He said, but why? I said, well, because that's just like the next chapter. Like, that's what I do. And he says, well, I will be happy to take your money, but I want you to know the following things. Once you adopt her, she will not be able to get any kind of help with college that she would be able to get if she was considered part of the system.
Okay.
She would get all kinds of college grants, all kind of college benefits. She would be able to get health insurance until she was 26 through the state of California. There are all these benefits in California. And so I said, he goes, the only benefit is you get to say you adopted her. You're already in Taiwan. Like, So think about it and let me know. So I sat my daughter down and I said, I want to adopt you. I want to make you mine officially. But I didn't save for college. I didn't know I was going to have her. You know what I mean? I just, in my mind, I wasn't planning this really long term. So I didn't have a lot of money set aside for college. I didn't have, any real plan, and she's like, you're my mom. I don't need a piece of paper to tell me you're my mom. So if I change my mind, I'll let you know. I said, yeah, if you change your mind, let me know. It's 10,000. It's not the money. I'll spend the 10,000. But you know what I mean? There's a lot of benefits to you not, at least in the state of California, to not having somebody legally listed as your parent.
Right.
And so we opted to never do it.
Okay.
And so she was mine by all sense of the word. I could keep her on my insurance, all of those things, everything matched. But when she became 18, she was able to get all the grants she needed for college.
Oh.
She got college paid for. She was able to do all those things that I would not have been able to afford to do for her because I had not planned for any of that.
Right.
So so it worked out.
You ended up just being her legal a guardian, and she got all the benefits. But what was it that made you decide that you wanted to adopt her? Was it feeling, guilty, or was it?
No, I remember the day almost exactly. So about a year in, she had been calling me Aunt Heather, Aunt Heather, Aunt Heather, Aunt Heather, right?
And how old was she at this time?
So I got her when she was 2. So this is about 3.
At 3 still, you were wanting to do the adoption thing.
Well, she was calling me Aunt Heather still. And my sister was still coming and going, and she kept having a plan. She just needed a little more time. But my daughter one day said at breakfast, I'd like to have toast today, Mom. Or Mommy. I'd like to have toast today, Mommy. And she looked away and then looked away from me really quickly. She knew she wasn't sure if she was supposed to do that, but she wanted to do it, right? And so I just remember thinking, this needs to be permanent for her. This can't be transient for her. For her, it can't be. For me, I was fine with whatever. We'll figure it out as we go. But she needed stability. She needed someone. And so I sat her down and I said, what do you want to call me? You can call me whatever you want, whatever feels comfortable to you. If you want to call me Mommy, I would love that. If you want to, you can keep calling me Aunt Heather. We can go with, used to call, my roommate Taco Dana. We could come up with a unique name. If there's something unique, you can call me. And she says, I'd like it to be Mommy. Oh. And so I knew at that point that it needed to be permanent. And so at that point, there really had been no argument against it. Had my sister at any time from that point on come in and said, I want her, I would have fought. At that point, I would have fought. At that point, I would have adopted. At that point, I think I would have won. But she never did. You know what I mean? So there was never any reason to pursue it just to have that piece of paper.
Right.
But had it ever gotten ugly or ever gotten weird in any way, then I certainly would have done it. Because my daughter needed to know that she was mine. But her and I had the discussion when she was a little bit older, and she's like, "You're my mom. I know you're my mom. I don't need a piece of paper that tells me that." So yeah.
So, did you guys? At what point did your sister sort of drop out, as in not expecting anything of still having attachments to her daughter, or has she ever done that?
She had another child.
Okay.
So she had another child, and I think in her mind, when she had another child, she had Noah. She had a little boy, and when she had Noah, I think in her mind, she was going to do Noah the way she should have done Julia, and she was kind of just gave into the fact that this was supposed to happen. And she even made little comments along the way after she had Noah about how blessed she was or how blessed I was that she gave me a baby, because I didn't have one of my own, And at this point my daughter was probably 7 or 8 when she had Noah. So I'm like 37, 38. I'm probably not going to have children of my own. So my sister, I think to make herself feel better, was like, oh, look, I gave you a baby. You never would have had one had I not done it. So in her mind, she turned it into, she did this great thing, which she did,
help you up.
right? Like, I mean, it ended up being a great thing, but still kind of twisted. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, well, I probably would have had kids of my own because I probably would have been dating instead of babysitting. You know what I mean? Like, I probably would have ended up getting married and having children of my own. But I had decided once I had Julia, since I thought it was temporary, that I would put dating on hold. I didn't want, she had already had too many people coming in and out of her life. The only people she knew was, me, my sister, her, the dad, and my mom. And my mom died, dad disappeared, and mom disappeared. I was the only one left. So I didn't want to bring anybody in that could disappear. I mean, even when my roommate moved out, it was traumatic. You know what I mean? I remember thinking, she was traumatized when my roommate moved out. And I remember thinking at that time, I can't have anybody coming and going. And so I just put my personal life on hold for a very, very long time. So it was probably about that time where my sister said, oh, I'm going to do this one right. And I gave you that one. And so I'm a good person. That's kind of what she told herself.
I don't know. It's just interesting how people's perceptions are so different from reality or, from other people at times.
Well, I think it's all survival, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think we all have perceptions that help us survive, right? That help, like we were talking about earlier, right? As a child, you perceive something a certain way so that you can live with it.
Yeah.
It may not be the reality that everyone else sees, but it's your reality. And for my sister, that's her reality, right? And so, and I don't deny her that because it makes her feel good. And there's no harm in me letting my sister feel good about that.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Like, and the better place my sister is, the better it is for my daughter, right? Because, they don't have a relationship at this point, but if at some point they do have a relationship, I'd like that relationship, that conversation to be had where my sister can say to my daughter, I gave you to my sister, and I did that because I love you and I want it to feel good to my daughter. And if I say, you did not, you ruined my whole, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's easier for me to live in that reality, even though it's not.
Yeah.
It wasn't really my reality.
I know. We know ourselves, but the fact that you're magnanimous, you'll let your sister do that. No need to stir the water or stir the mud.
It would just hurt my daughter in the end and my
exactly.
sister, and there's no point in doing that. I gain nothing out of it. I know the truth, right? She can have her own truth, and it's fine.
Yeah.
So I let her have it.
So, did you and your daughter ever, at any time from the time that you had her to now as an adult, ever sit down and have a conversation about this, about what happened, or has it just been kind of smoothly going along? Not smoothly, because I know you had some challenges in terms of this topic of adoption.
Right.
Actually, she wasn't really adopted either. She was,
Right.
So I guess you never really had to.
Well, we did. So the thing about it that was unique for my daughter, and I don't know for you because you were 5, is it's never been like a secret. It wasn't like we had to sit down and go, okay, I need to tell you something.
Right.
You're adopted. So she always knew. The difference was why she was adopted changed slowly. You know what I mean? Like, I couldn't sit her down at 3 and say, I adopted you because your mother has addiction issues, and all that was not a conversation to have with a 3-year-old. Right. You know what I mean? So when my daughter would ask questions, it would be very kid-oriented conversations. Like, your mom was very young when she had you. She was too young to take care of you the way you needed to be taken care of. For example, you're 3 or 4 years old, you can now feed yourself, but your niece, who's a baby, can't, right? And so that's kind of, as you get older, you can take care of babies more, you can take care of things better. Your mom was very young. And that sufficed for a while, right? And then as my daughter got a little bit older and realized 18 is really not young, you know what I mean? Like, 18-year-olds can take care of babies. Then the questions got more deep, and then I would have conversations with, she had some mental health issues, which my sister does. And she had a lot of, she was prescribed a lot of medications that made it difficult for her to stay focused. And because of that, she, made the ultimate sacrificed and gave you up, and then as she got a little bit older, it was like, okay, so here's, those mental health issues turned into drug addiction, and things got got quite different. So the conversation has always been ongoing, and I've been as honest as I could along the age stage that I thought was appropriate. At this point, my daughter knows. I mean, she knows for the most part everything. I had to be pretty brutally honest because at 18, my sister reached out to her, and I wanted them to have a relationship if it could be healthy, and I needed my daughter to have the full scope of what she might be dealing with. And so I had to be a little bit more honest than I had been up to that point, saying that she, has some serious drug addictions and has been, hospitalized, and she can be very unstable. And just, I welcome them to try to have a relationship, but that to keep me kind of in the loop because things could get difficult for you to understand, and I want you to be able to talk to me about it. So, I mean, I've been as honest as I could with her. At this point, I don't believe that they're having much of a conversation other than, an occasional Facebook post or something.
Right.
Because my sister's still very unstable, unfortunately.
Yeah, I guess I've been kind of really lucky in my part because I'm back in Taiwan, of course, and I'm actually was reconnected with my real family. My sisters and brothers are still living here. And it was, I had no idea actually that we had kept the connection, but apparently there had been communication by letters and things like that from my family here to my adopted parents, and just asking about how I was and everything. But growing up, I never really wanted to have anything to do with that, that side. I knew I was adopted, but I just had no thought that I wanted to reconnect with them because I was so American and stuff. But I'm really actually quite grateful that things happened that we were connected. We were living in Maryland at the time. My dad was in the Navy, as I said. We were all packed up and ready to go. We were going to go to Hawaii. And my brother-in-law had a business trip to DC. And so that was right after apparently Taiwan was opened up for martial law. And so for business, people were allowed to go out and travel. And, if it hadn't happened that way, we would have moved to Hawaii and he wouldn't have been able to contact us because the address that we had was in Maryland.
Oh, right.
So, it's really weird how things just happen. But in that way, when my brother and I first connected with our family was after we ended up moving to Hawaii. We spent a couple of days with my brother-in-law, but, didn't really know him. He was kind of a stranger. And my first reunion with them was really quite interesting, I guess, if I look at it in this way. I still was very Americanized. I didn't embrace that part of my, culture, my heritage and things. And we stayed for 2 weeks, my brother and I. And it was good to have that part of the family, but it wasn't really like they were part of my family anymore.
Right.
And I think it was about 8 years after that we really reconnected again. So yeah, it's interesting, but I'm really happy that I've been able to connect with them. And I think it's important that you also gave your daughter the opportunity that if she wanted to reconnect,
Right.
that was something that you were open to.
Right.
If she wanted it. And I think
Right.
that's really important.
Well, yeah, I think it's great that you're doing that because I believe, the world according to Heather, but I believe that, no matter how much I love my daughter and how much I did to provide for my daughter, there are certain things that I will never be. One is her biological mother.
Right.
I'll never be that, right? Yeah. And that's something that's a pretty strong bond, right? And I will never be, your siblings are you're connected in a way, right? Even though you don't have the history with them or the memories with them, there's connection there. And I think it's important to explore that. Now, will it expand into something grand and wonderful and you're doing Christmas and Thanksgiving together? I think it's very healthy. And I always want to provide the healthiest road for my daughter to travel, right? And I can't lie to myself and say that I have every single piece of her puzzle. I don't have every piece of her puzzle. Your biological parents are a part of your story. Your biological siblings are a part of your story. Your adopted parents don't have those pieces.
Right.
You know what I mean? They don't have them. So the fact that they allow you, you don't want to get teary-eyed, but the fact that they allow you to fill that puzzle is pretty spectacular. And I think it's great, right? Because those pieces are a part of who you are. And you might as well explore them and fill them in. So, and it's not easy, I would imagine, to do. So I'm proud of you for doing that.
Yeah, it's been a journey, I have to say, on that. But so your daughter's not with you here. Is she? What's she doing, or what's she up to nowadays?
So after she graduated so she came to Taipei when we moved here. And so she went to Taipei American School and graduated from there, and then went off to college in Wisconsin. And
Interesting.
I know. Well, she found this really unique liberal arts college that had a total of like 1,200 students in the whole school. Like her classes were like 4 and 5 kids. And she has some learning disabilities and some other things that are challenging. So the school ended up being a perfect fit for her. So she went to she went to Beloit and fell in love with Wisconsin. Again, we're polar opposites. I visited her one time in the freezing snow, and I'm love you, but I ain't never coming back here ever again. Like, it was so cold. She loves it. She's always been somebody who loves to put on a sweatshirt. Living in Taipei, she'd run around here in a sweatshirt. I thought, what in God's name? It's freaking, she's just that kind of kid. And so she's very happy there. She's now working. She's adulting. She's doing all of the things that, you hope your kids do. She hasn't landed her dream job. She's actually going to go back to school to do a little bit more training and try to do something more. She was more general ed when she was in college. She didn't really focus in on anything that she loved. So she's going back to school in January. So yes, but she's in Wisconsin. It's beautiful in the summer, but oh no,
They've got good cheese there.
Yeah,
that's so stereotypical.
I have cheese curds. It was delicious. I love the food, but you have to freeze to get it, right? Like the walk from the car to the restaurant, body parts start falling off, right? Like it was awful. I thought, I'm never coming back. I visited her one winter, and I will not ever go back.
Yeah, it's kind of like me. My blood is really thin too. I mean, when we lived in Maryland, it got a little bit thicker because there was the East Coast weather. But then most of my life has been in Hawaii, so warm weather. Anyway, So if you were to just think about one thing that really, because of the adoption or because of your relationship with your daughter, that has changed you, would you have share what that is?
There's so many little things, right? Like, I mean, just being a parent in general, you see the world differently, right? You see the world as almost dangerous. You're so much more protective. You have you're more guarded about a lot of things, but you also have more hope and more like thought process about what the future might hold through the eyes of a child. It's just different. I know for me, having my daughter changed the way I saw my mother, because for me, my mom was just an utter failure, right? And in a lot of ways she was. I mean, I don't want to let her off the hook completely. She made some pretty terrible decisions. But being a mom, I realized, it's easy to make a bad decision, right? Like, it's easy to...
Yeah, once you sit in the, in the seat,
You can see, like, wow. It's not this, this get a book and follow the rules kind of thing. It is so much more than that. So I think it gave me a unique perspective in what it is to love unconditionally. I mean, that was the first thing. She's the first thing I had that I loved unconditionally. You know what I mean? I mean, I have a brother who I'm very close with. So him and her were pretty much all I had. So it gave me the opportunity to do that. It also gave me an opportunity to realize that even if I make mistakes, as long as I'm doing things with love and it's okay. You know, I remember the job I had at the time when I adopted my daughter. I was the number one sales rep for this very large company. Anyways, AT&T, if you know it. Anyways, and I was the number one sales rep in all of California, and I was the rising star, and I was doing all of these amazing things. And I remember talking to my therapist about it, and she's like, you can't balance both perfectly. Like, you're going to have to start picking one over the other, because I was working late and not getting home. I mean, my daughter was never, not taken care of, but I was relying on a lot of nannies, and I was relying on a lot of outsourcing things that I should have been doing, And she just looked at me one day, my therapist, and she's like, that company would replace you in a heartbeat. Like, you're a number to them. That child is not. Like, nobody could replace you for that child. And she just encouraged me to get a better balance. And it was at that point that I really started to look at a lot of things. One, being single. Like, I thought, okay, I'm not doing her any favors by being single either. You know what I mean? Like, it would benefit her to have, somebody in her life, and she's older now. And so I started to put the work career part of me aside and started focusing on having a healthy family and having a healthy life. And as a result, met my husband, who was actually her teacher, which is totally funny, but we can get into that another time. But I had worked full time all the time, and so I never had time to volunteer at school. And so when I kind of started making this change to try to be a better parent and be more involved, one of the first things I did is I'm like, I'm going to start volunteering at the classroom. And I went on a field trip. We went to see the King Tut exhibit in San Francisco, and I was on the bus, and I was like, the first time ever. And my daughter's in 6th grade at this point. I've never gone to school other than, teacher conferences. And I was just like, wow, there's this whole other part of my life I could be experiencing. And ultimately, he was her teacher at the time. And so, I mean, we didn't start dating until later, but, I met a man who actually already knew my daughter.
Yeah.
They already had somewhat of a connection, so she wasn't a stranger. He wasn't a stranger, and, was able to get a better balance of life. I think she gave me a better balance of life. I think right now I'd still be reaching for more money, more power, more status, because I really, something we didn't touch on here is I had a pretty crappy childhood, right? And so for me, all of those things distanced me from the poor little girl, right? And so status and money and power and accolades and all of those things were so valuable to me. And without those things, I was nothing. And it took having my daughter and realizing that I could have value far greater than any paycheck, far greater than any, number on a stat sheet, by just showing up for her every day and being at home to make dinner. And it changed who I was. And it changed, I ultimately quit that job. I quit a job. When I quit that job, all the way from the top executives, wanted to interview me. Like, where are you going? You're making a ton of money here. Why are you leaving? Like, I have to. I have a balance of life that I need to pursue. In this company, I can't do it. So I think ultimately it just shifted the direction of my life in a way that ended up being more healthy. So
it's amazing how things, turn out. The challenges in your life turn into blessings and things, and the learning lessons that you find along the way makes us who we are today.
For sure.
And I'm sure for your daughter too as well. So thank you, Heather, for sharing your story with me and with our audience. And I just want to really take this time to thank my mom and dad for going through all the hoops and loops to adopt my brother and I and give us an opportunity for the better life. And I also want to thank all the moms and dads out there that have adopted other little boys and girls to give them a better life. And if you have any stories of adoption that you would like to share with us, please contact us at theoalshow@gmail.com. And maybe we can talk about your story in a future episode. So once again, Heather, thank you so much.
No,
And,
thank you. Thank you for saying that too. It helps me too to remember that,
Yeah.
you know, I'd like to think that I provided a somewhat slimmer version of a good life for her. And it was all worth it. And I'm sure it was for your parents too.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. This is Sharon Landon, and see you next time on Old Asian Lady. Bye-bye.